Hi, thanks for tuning in. In this tutorial on close focus wide angle, I'm going to explain why it's all about perspective to get these cool shots. We get the dramatic, high impact images with close focus wide angle by relying on exaggeration or stretching of apparent image size across varying distances from the camera. It's all about perspective. A wide angle lens is preferred. With an SLR, a wide angle lens is necessary. With a compact camera, however, we don't even need an external wide angle lens as long as we zoom all the way out and as long as we can focus pretty closely on the subject in the foreground. We also need a pretty small aperture to allow for high depth of field to get not only focus of the subject in the foreground, but also good depth of field and allow focus of the subject in the background. The most important thing is we must get close to the foreground subject. And I'm going to show some examples of taking pictures of images at varying distances using both an SLR camera with a wide angle lens and a compact camera without any fancy lenses. So check this out. Here's a picture I took of my hand. I was trying to test to see if my strobes worked on a dive, and I didn't even realize my dive buddy was about 5 or 6 feet behind me. And you'll notice a couple things. First, my hand is in good focus, and the dive buddy is also in relatively good focus because I have a fisheye lens and a small aperture which confers very high depth of field. Not only that, my dive buddy looks either very far away or much smaller than my hand. You get that stretching of perspective in size and distance, whereas really my dive buddy was just a few feet behind my hand. I took some shots in my backyard using my SLR camera. Now I have a crop sensor, but I'll use the focal lengths in terms of millimeters, a 35 millimeter equivalent camera to avoid confusion. So this camera was zoomed to a 75 millimeter focal length, and I'm a few feet away from the subject, the similarly sized frog and crab, with my wife a few feet behind the frog. And I took a shot, and then I zoomed all the way out, and I now have an equivalent of 18 millimeters. So this is a wide angle shot with my SLR. I got as close as I could to focus on the subject in the foreground, less than a foot away, and I took the shot. All right, let's see how these images come out. The first shot, when I'm a few feet away with a 75 millimeter equivalent focal length, you can see the frog and the similarly sized crab appear about the same size, and my wife is behind it. Not bad, but look at how this image pops out at you when I'm much closer to the frog. The frog now looks so much larger, and there's much more depth and perspective distortion. The crab looks relatively smaller, and my wife smaller yet behind the crab. And yet, with the good depth of field with a wide angle lens and a small aperture, everything looks like it's in pretty good focus. But let's see how we do with just a point and shoot camera and no wide angle lens. Here I'm zoomed to a 35 millimeter equivalent of about 70 millimeters, similar to with the SLR, and I'm a few feet away. I took a shot, and now I get as close as I can. This is a 24 millimeter equivalent. Not really true wide angle, but I'm allowed a very close approach with this particular camera, and I got a picture of the frog. I had the smallest aperture, f11, and let's see how the images come out. This one, when I'm a few feet away, similar to the SLR. You see the frog, the crab, and my wife, and again, similar to with the SLR with the wide angle lens, the frog now looks so much larger. You get that stretching and distortion of perspective because I'm so close to the frog. The crab and my wife are a little farther back. My wife might be slightly blurred, but again, with a smaller aperture, we get pretty darn good depth of field. Pretty cool. Here's a shot. I really don't mind this shot. I think the composition's kind of interesting. This is my dive buddy with an angelfish, but my dive buddy was a little behind the angelfish, but I wish I could have gotten closer to the angelfish. It's so important to get close to the subject in the foreground with true close focus wide angle. On the other hand, here's another shot, similar circumstance, different dive, but now I'm less than a foot away from the angelfish. I'm using a fisheye lens with no strobe and an SLR camera and a small aperture, and man, look at how big that angelfish looks compared to my dive buddy, who looks very distant but really is only a few feet away. And notice also that everything's in relatively good focus because of the good depth of field we have. Okay, so we just saw some examples of how for close focus wide angle we need a wide angle lens to get close and to focus on the foreground image. We need a small aperture to allow for high depth of field and good focus on both the foreground and background object. We must get close. We rely on exaggeration or stretching of apparent image size across varying distances from the camera, and we use this unique perspective to obtain compelling and dramatic images with close focus wide angle. Thanks for tuning in, and please check out subsequent tutorials on this technique.